Order. I remind honourable members that there have been some changes to normal practice in order to support the new hybrid arrangements. Timings of debates have been amended to allow technical arrangements to be made for the next debate. There will also be suspensions between each debate. I remind members participating physically and virtually that they must arrive at the start of debates in Westminster Hall. Members are expected to remain for the entire debate. I must also remind members participating virtually that they are visible at all times, both to each other and to us in the Boothroyd room. If members attending virtually have any technical problems, they should email the Westminster Hall Clerks email address, which is westminsterhallclerks@parliament.uk. Members attending physically should clean their spaces before they use them and as they leave the room. I would also like to remind members that Mr Speaker has stated that masks should be worn in Westminster Hall. Members attending physically who are in the latter stages of the call list should use the seats in the public gallery and move on to the horseshoe when seats become available. Members can only speak from the horseshoe where there are microphones. I must also say that because of the weather today, gentlemen, I'm very happy if you wish to remove your jackets, and I'm going to try and get everybody in at this point impose an informal 3-minute time limit. Jonathan Gullis.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petitions 583310 and 584632 relating to football governance. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Elliott, for this hugely important debate, and it is great to see so many members in attendance and on the call list today. Even better so after a thumping 1-0 victory for England against Croatia, although I'm sure that our members from Wales and Scotland may not be feeling as perky, although obviously, I look forward to the big game on Friday where I'm expecting England to give Scotland a sound thumping. But in this place, we often split along party lines in our debates, but I'm confident that there will be an unusual level of consensus here today, because I think we all recognise the vital role football plays in the communities we have the privilege to represent. Before I get started properly, I want to thank all those who took the time to share their views with me before this debate. I heard from a wide range of opinions on this debate, but across the board, from club owners and ex-players to the fans who are the lifeblood of the game. And I think it's fair to say there is now widespread acceptance that change is needed. I also want to thank the Our Beautiful Game campaign group, which includes senior figures from the game, such as David Bernstein, a former FA chairman, and Gary Neville, as well as my honourable friend, the member for Maidstone and the Weald, who really got this debate rolling with her private members bill earlier this year, for lending their time and expertise to help me prepare today. I also want to give a special mention to the honourable member for Chatham and Aylesford, who is leading from the Minister's Department the fan-led review into football, and for the time that she shared with me as well. The recent debacle of the European Super League, the equivalent of the 2008 banking crisis for football, shocked everyone involved in the game. It showed why there is a real need to shake things up. Let us be clear, had the so-called Big Six succeeded with their breakaway attempt, football as we know in our country would have died. Our Premier League, the most watched and the best league in the world, would have been split apart and the pyramid of English football would have crumbled. It was quite right that the ESL was met with disgust and ridicule across the board, and I'm very pleased that for now it has been seen off. But we know football is now big business, and the ESL is not the only example of why change is needed. Fans already had long-standing concerns. There have been many examples of the identity of football clubs, which are central to the identity of so many communities, having that identity changed, with fans unable to resist. A couple of glaring examples spring to mind: the relocation of Wimbledon Football Club from its centuries-old home to Milton Keynes, and the owner of Cardiff City's decision to change the club's colours from its traditional blue to red. Clubs are also open to inappropriate owners coming in and running them in an unsustainable way, with devastating impacts on their local communities. Two examples of this came recently, with the sad demise of Bury in August 2019 and Wigan entering administration in July 2020. Unless we change the way football is run and ensure clubs are treated not just as businesses, but as community assets and heritage brands, these kind of events will be repeated in the future. This brings me on to the first of our petitions, the 50%+1 model submitted by Angus Yale. Angus launched this petition because he feels that this model of ownership would ensure decisions about clubs fall into the hands of a collective of people who care about the good game instead of just one owner. In Angus's opinion, elite clubs especially are now just run as businesses, and profit appears to come before anything else, with fans' loyalty being exploited through expensive tickets and merchandise. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
Madam Chair, I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. And I'm a supporter of Leicester City, have been for a wee boy, 16-year-old for 52 years I have been a member and supporter of Leicester City. But the reason why I say that is because it doesn't have to be a big team for people to support it. And does the honourable gentleman agree that fans care about the nature of the team? They care more than their price of a ticket. They care about integrity. They care about the history of their club. They care about the team pride. And that's what it's all about. But that's what the fans want. They don't want a Super League. They just want to support their club.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I actually spoke with the Foxes Supporters Trust in advance, who were very complimentary about the dialogue they have with their owners, and I know the honourable gentleman was buzzing from the FA Cup victory that recently took place for Leicester City, and I'm sure obviously will be cheering on Blighty in the upcoming game against Scotland. I won't put him on the spot personally with that one, but I'm sure he will secretly. But I couldn't agree with him more. You know, the football clubs are massively important to the history and identity of their communities. In fact, communities were built around such football clubs. We saw that in Bury, where the honourable member for Bury North has banged on relentlessly. I don't think any more doughty a champion for Bury Football Club's return to its proper ways. But I'm also very aware that in Burslem, the mother town of Stoke-on-Trent, Port Vale, surrounded by the terraced houses of the old pot bank workers, it very much is the beating heart of the community. And I know the Minister saw that firsthand when he recently came to visit, because having fans in charge, as was said with the 50%+1, as Angus put, having fans in charge of key voting rights around the club would help to stop the clear greed of some owners and allow clubs to be run in a way that benefits the fans, local communities and the good of the game. Clearly there are some good owners who run their clubs in a sustainable way and allow their fans a good level of access to the behind-the-scenes running of the club. I'm of course going to be very obvious in my bias here, but I'm going to mention the Wembley of the North, Port Vale Football Club at Vale Park, and Stoke-on-Trent's second team, Stoke City. And obviously I will just mention that I was being sarcastic there before I get the deluge of abuse on my Facebook. But, you know, I'm very lucky to have both Port Vale in my constituency and Stoke City FC within the community. Both are run in a truly sustainable and fan-friendly way. To pick just a few examples, in Stoke City, they offer free away travel for their fans and have frozen their season ticket prices for 14 successive years. Port Vale recently became the EFL Community Club of the Year, having distributed more than 300,000 meals to local people in need during the pandemic, as well as having the Port Vale FC Foundation and the Hub Foundation that has been one of the early pioneers in the holiday activities programme, which started in 2017 with the A Up Duck holiday activities programme. Even small clubs such as Milton United Football Club raised £1,000 towards a local lad, Ashton Hulme, who's getting a top quality prosthetic leg due to the fact that, sadly, due to a rare type of bone cancer, he lost his leg. And obviously the Academy at Crewe Alexandra have been doing fantastic work to support Ashton and his family at this very difficult time, with over £110,000 raised by local givers. But there are, as the honourable gentleman from Strangford intervened on, the great clubs in the Premier League, such as Leicester City Football Club, with the Foxes Trust telling me that they are broadly happy with the way their owners operate and the access they get to the inner runnings of their club. However, there are many more examples of owners who do not operate in this way. And so I agree that there needs to be some reform for fans to have a greater input in their clubs. There must surely be a way to protect key aspects of clubs, which are so much more than just businesses, so their identities are not changed unrecognisably and that they are run in a sustainable way. However, I personally feel the 50%+1 model isn't realistic for English football. It is hard to see how this kind of ownership structure could be brought in. I also have concerns about the impact it could have on our game. A range of voices, unsurprisingly including club owners, but also fan groups, have said that 50%+1 model could seriously discourage investment. In Germany, which has the 50%+1 and made it famous, Bayern Munich has now won the Bundesliga 9 years in a row. There is no significant investment into other clubs in the German league. Unless you look at RB Leipzig, for example, where the fan supporters are all Red Bull employees, which you could then say brings the beautiful game over in Germany into potential disrepute. So I don't think that anyone wants to see such type of things in our country. But now the 50%+ model isn't the only reason for this, but it does seem that it prevents ambitious owners coming forward. Being frank, owners won't want to invest in a club without being able to control the club's direction. So if the 50% plus model isn't the answer, what is? Well, one way to safeguard clubs for fans was suggested by Gary Neville. You could look at a 50% plus one as a veto or a voting structure rather than an ownership structure. Something along the lines of a golden vote on key decisions where owners would need to seek supporters' approval to make changes to the club, such as on heritage issues like the name and location of the stadium, could be viable. Another option, as suggested by the Football Supporters Association, would be to let supporters buy equity in their club of up to a certain percentage, such as 10 or 15%, that gives them a real say in how the club is run. But as well as giving fans more say in how their club is run, there are wider issues within football that need addressing. This is really the crux of today's debate and brings us on to the second petition, which calls for a new independent regulator of football to be introduced. Introduced by Alex Rolfe, the petition calls for the government to use the fan-led review of football's governance to establish an independent football regulator. Alex says that, like a referee, an independent regulator would safeguard our beautiful game impartially. A regulator could protect the game against another attempt as at Super League or other efforts to put money ahead of fans. Gary Neville and Alex agree that, like water companies, energy providers, financial services and the media, football matters to millions and should also have a regulator of its own. It does seem that without an independent regulator, the glaring issues in English football won't be resolved. There is no overall leadership and therefore vested interests continue to prevail. The financial disparity between rich and poor has frankly become obscene. The game is devoid of agreed priorities. The high-ups in football all know what the problems are, but to date there has been no collective will or incentive for the decision-makers to get on with sorting it out. As spelled out by many of the people I spoke to before today, the issues are financial disparity and unsustainability, owner suitability rules, a power structure that is fundamentally out of balance, societal issues such as racism and homophobia in the game, and the exploitation of clubs and fans. Gary Neville put it well when he said that the banking crisis was a moment for an independent regulator to be needed. Well, the European Super League is the equivalent crisis in football, and if we are to ensure the game remains something as fans we can enjoy, as well as export around the world, then the crunch time has arrived. Picking out just a few examples to illustrate the scale of these problems, the 20th place team in the Premier League, thankfully not my team Fulham, who my grandmother indoctrinated me to support from the age of 5, will get £100 million, whereas the winner of the Championship is going to get just £6 million. Financial sustainability is in real danger, with clubs in the English Championship spending £837 million on wages, despite only receiving £785 million of income in 2018-19. I am happy to give way to honourable gentleman.
Would he agree with me that the key point is what he's just said, that the wage structure and the fixed cost and the wage structure of 99% of teams involved in English football is completely unsustainable? The current wages being paid out are simply unaffordable. My team, Bury, had 3,000 or 4,000 watching every 2 weeks, and players were getting paid thousands upon thousands. How do we address that problem?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I know that Gary Neville is actually working, I think, on this salary wage cap committee that's been set up by the EFL to have a look at that very thing. And I think you are right. At the end of the day, the honourable gentleman, is right in the fact that whilst Gary used the term redistribution of wealth, and as I did state as a Conservative, that word did make me shudder with the idea of socialism coming down the line. But actually, what he did say was he meant that actually at the end of the day, why is it the Premier League is holding all the wealth? And I saw the Minister spend what I feel like was a very long 10 months, probably locked in a room with the head of the Premier League and the head of the EFL, to come to some sort of consensus to bail out clubs like my beloved Port Vale in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Torque. And it shouldn't have taken 10 months to come to that situation. It shouldn't have taken that level of time in order to get there, because ultimately football is for the fans, and the fans in that moment, for example, were almost forgotten. But I'm very grateful to the Minister, who I know was regularly talking with me and other members from across the House about the negotiations and what was going on, to keep us informed, and I'm very grateful that he was able to bang heads together and get this important deal over the line. Because there are clubs like Stoke City Football Club who are obviously owned by owners who run Bet365. They would openly admit that they are not a club that is in need of financial aid or support, but they're very aware about clubs around them as well as clubs below them that are in need, and clubs like Port Vale that get similar type of crowds to those who are at Bury do need to see a fair share in football of that money trickle down, particularly to grassroots where we're going to have the future generations taking place. The Premier League has so much power, it can set its own punishment. For example, let's just look at the big 6 Premier League clubs. have been able to decide their own punishment for trying to break away and join the ESL, paying just £3.6 million each as a gesture of goodwill. Let's put that into context. These clubs spent more than £150 million over the last year on agents' fees alone, and they seem to think that offering £3.6 million each is a suitable punishment for trying to destroy our beautiful game. Football has proven itself incapable of sorting itself out, and there is now a widespread consensus that an independent regulator is needed. So what would that independent regulator look like? We all agree for a regulator to have any real bite, it must be independent of current structures, such as the Premier League clubs and the FA. It must sit above the existing bodies and have the ability to enforce targets and judgments throughout the game structures. Voices such as those of the former governor of the Bank of England, Lord King, have emphasised that the regulator will need an emphasis on financial as well as legal knowledge. This will be needed so the regulator can decide on new ways of distributing funds to the wider game based on a funding formula to spread funding more fairly throughout the English football pyramid. This will also be important in bringing in a new, proper, robust process to check owners before they take on a club. The need for a proper test of an owner's suitability was not just the opinion of fans I spoke to, but was shared by the owners I spoke to as well. Supporters groups and those with experience of the game at the highest level agree that the regulator must not have any role in how the game is played. For example, it must not have the role in deciding on VAR's place in football. It must be limited to the governance issues. There is also the question of how long the regulator would need to operate for. From across the cross-section of people involved in football, there does seem to be a consensus, really. The FA should be the regulator. However, it is both a commercial organisation as well as having some regulatory functions, and so it doesn't really work. It is also reliant on the Premier League for its income, and so it's not independent in any meaningful way. It could be that an independent regulator could be set up, lead change in the game for a few years, then hand over to the FA once it has been made fit for purpose. And on the societal problems in football, such as racism and homophobia, as well as representation of different groups, there are already targets in place. But a regulator could enforce these targets and punish those who continue only to pay lip service to them. As David Davies, former executive director of the FA and member of the Our Beautiful Game campaign group, has said, football has the power to be a fantastic force for good. How to enable it to be a power for good is the question. Thank you, Ms Elliott.
Thank you. The question is that the House has considered E-petitions 583310 and 584632 relating to football governance. Christina Rees.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's always a pleasure to serve under you as Chair. I thank the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North for his excellent introductory remarks. I thank my Neath constituents for signing the petitions. And I congratulate Wales for securing a draw in their first Euro match last Saturday, despite not playing their best. The anger and furore over the recent efforts of 6 English Premier clubs to form a breakaway European Super League sparked universal condemnation from fans, but demonstrated the importance of football to the sporting community and to wider society, and was evidence of a deep disconnect between football clubs and the communities they once represented. Many clubs are now global businesses, far removed from the supporters and communities from which they were established. At the heart of this problem is ownership. The defining feature was once supporters and their interests, but now the footballing model pushes clubs into greater financial insecurity at the hands of unscrupulous owners with scant regard for fans and communities. Fans are taken for granted that they will always support their club, irrespective of not having any say in how their club is operated. The UK government's fan-led review was welcome, but whole-scale reform is needed, putting ownership at the forefront. Fan ownership has been part of a campaign the Cooperative Party has been conducted for the past 20 years. In 2007, the Labour Party and the Cooperative Party founded the fan ownership organisation Supporters Direct, and campaigned for funding and resources so that supporters could start fan-owned trusts and then progress to take over their club. We fought for supporters to have a place on club boards so that fans could have a voice. We campaigned for the community shares model, often used in supporters' trusts, and to strengthen community asset legislation to prevent the sale of football grounds. The Football Association and governing authority should welcome community ownership as a necessary means to safeguard clubs and ensure their survival. Football clubs are too precious to their communities and supporters to be at the mercy of unregulated, unscrupulous owners, and suffer weak governance from the Football Association, unwilling to take on those with vested interests in the game. A robust, effective, independent regulatory framework with statutory backing is vital to safeguard football. Unless supporters can influence or have ownership of clubs or assets, we will continue to be second-class spectators. The 50+1 rule is the ownership model in the majority of German football clubs. Commercial investors are unable to gain a majority share and supporters retain a majority of voting rights. 50+1 would not be suitable for share ownership of top English Premier League clubs that have invested millions of pounds, but would be suitable as a voting structure. The 5 parts of the game should work together for the benefit of football. Thank you, Ms Elliott.
Thank you. Damien Collins.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. Football governance has been debated in Parliament. It has been the subject of parliamentary reports, government reports over the last 10 years. What all of those have in common is a consensus that there needs to be more independent regulation and supervision of what happens within football to stop bad things happening. It's the case that many financial failures of clubs could have been resolved before they happened if there was proper independent scrutiny of the finances of those clubs. Issues around ownership could be resolved if there was a proper fit and proper person test that could be administered against people when they buy clubs or during their management of those clubs. But we've seen time and again that no such effective operation exists and that the leagues, particularly the football leagues, simply do not have the resources to enforce it. Too often, when a club gets into difficulties, fans speak up. They find the football authorities can do nothing to help. And when they turn to Parliament, they find that we don't have any legislative power to intervene. If the fan-led review, the latest football governance review, is to be meaningful in its outcome, it needs to recommend that we need to have an independent regulatory body that can oversee the financial management of clubs, have the power to intervene when things are going wrong, to see accounts, to make sure the clubs are spending within the limits of their rules and not overspending, and to make sure they're being run in a sustainable way so that those clubs are there for the future. These are the basic common failings that exist. And why do they exist? Because football doesn't have an effective governing body in this country. It is run by a combination of vested interests that don't always agree with each other. And fundamentally at league level, it's run by a rule book that is set and voted on by the chairs of the clubs themselves. They historically have not been very interested in independent scrutiny of what they do. Football clubs are not like any other business. They are there to be run in a sustainable way. The community should expect they will be there for future generations to enjoy. They are really cultural assets. Yes, they can be run in a commercial way and they can be very competitive, but they have to be run in a sustainable way as well. In other industries, like broadcasting, we have regulators in place with certain special powers that mean they can intervene and even withdraw a license to broadcast should they need to. Such a regulator in this country would similarly need a golden share. I believe it should be independent of all of the existing football bodies, including the FA, have a very strict and limited remit regarding the financial performance and governance of clubs, but very clear powers to intervene and even to put clubs into a form of sporting administration if things go wrong. The review should also consider as well other aspects of commercial pressure in football which can have detrimental impacts, particularly the relationship between agents, clubs and players, where agents can end up representing all three parties in a transaction. It's difficult to break that model when clubs want to sign players. And these are other issues, other financial issues that the regulator could look at. This is a reform that is long needed to make football sustainable.
Thank you. Sir Mark Hendrick.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. The state of our national game has been very much a story of rich man, poor man, with the very rich clubs with billionaire owners seeking to make themselves even more elite. We've seen that with Project Big Picture and the European Super League. And at the same time, much valued and cherished local clubs like Bury, Bolton and Wigan haven't survived or are struggling to survive. The major organisations in England, the Premier League, the Football Association and the English Football League are becoming both unable and I believe unwilling to act responsibly in the interests of the wider game of football, the supporters and their communities. It is therefore important to review the ownership structures and mechanisms of football club in this country so that they can be made to act responsibly. and look at the governance of football clubs going forward so that clubs can be obliged to behave responsibly and conduct themselves in a manner that satisfies all the stakeholders in the game. Also, there is a wide variety of levels of effective engagement and communication between clubs and their supporters throughout the various leagues in England. This can be improved in a number of ways by allowing fans onto club boards and looking at new methods to allow fans to take some ownership of the club they support. In addition, carrying out comparisons between the organisations of leagues in other countries, and this country could yield some answers too. The often cited 50% plus one model in the German Bundesliga may not be implementable in England, although the Prime Minister has threatened this. There well may be other ways of increasing fan influence over club decision-making that fall short of this. There is also some discussion about the ownership of golden shares, which could give some special ownership rights or privileges to fans to bring additional influence to bear on decision-making. There is a view that foreign owners should be treated differently for a variety of reasons, some relating to human rights and some for political reasons. These views could be put under the remit of the football regulator and taken into consideration when the licensing process takes effect. However, where clubs have been shown to have conducted themselves responsibly over the years, there, in my view, shouldn't be any attempt not to grant a licence where the owners of the club are not responsible for the behaviour of the government or regime in which the owners reside or come from. This review should not be an excuse to bash foreign owners who have made investments and brought tremendous footballing talent to this country. There is no doubt in my mind the need for a regulator who can exercise his or her powers through this licensing system. For too long, some clubs have not taken their responsibilities seriously, or indeed do not accept that they have responsibilities. The financial responsibilities have been made clear, but in addition to financial responsibilities, I believe clubs should have additional responsibilities in relation to how they engage with fans, and also social responsibilities to ensure that players and fans do not engage in behaviour that would bring the game into disrepute. By that, I don't mean just violence or hooliganism. I believe in taking a firm stance on issues such as racism and homophobia. The regulator, in my view, should have the power to do what individual football clubs, the Premier League, the FA, and the English Football League have failed to do over the years. That is, properly regulate and police the game so that clubs have responsibilities as well as rights. I think this approach is much more preferable to just commentators, fans, and even government ministers giving their views from the sidelines and nothing changing in the process. Thank you, Ms. Elliott.
Mrs. Helen Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The governance of English football is broken. Our national game, the beautiful game, is certainly in crisis, and now is certainly the time for fundamental reform that can only be achieved through the creation of an independent football regulator. This was a central recommendation of Saving the Beautiful Game, a manifesto for change, a report co-authored last year by a group of which I was a member. These experienced individuals with a deep interest in football brought everything together and produced a document that has proposed the creation of an independent football regulator. The regulator, Madam Chairman, would be absolutely independent, funded from within football, not by public money, and would not require government to run the game, something that's extremely important. The impact of an independent regulator would be more far-reaching than any of the specific responsibilities that it would have. And this is because an independent regulator would change the culture of the business of football in our country. Such a step would be a crucial milestone in a long overdue process of rebalancing our national game, a game that works just as much for the grassroots, the community and the lower league clubs as it does for the big six in the Premier League. An independent football regulator will be an affirmation from this place that football is part of our history, part of our culture and part of our communities, and it deserves protection. I want to pay tribute to the Minister for the leadership he has already shown on this issue in recent months, and I'm also delighted that the concept of an independent regulator is to be considered by my honourable friend, the member for Chatham and Aylesford. She is well suited to this task, and I know she'll carry out a review that is both broad and forensic, and which places the opinions of the fans at its very heart. We know that an independent football regulator would enjoy enormous support from the footballing public across the country. The fact that this petition reached 100,000 signatures in less than 12 hours speaks for itself. Madam Chairman, association football is the most popular sport in the entire world, played by over 250 million people in over 200 countries. And it was born in England over 150 years ago. And it has a huge connection with our communities across the length and breadth of our country. But if we want to protect and preserve that fabulous heritage for generations into the future, our football governance needs emergency surgery, and it needs that surgery now. So let's drive through the radical change required. Let's create an independent football regulator, and let's make the governance of this beautiful game that we all know and love fit for the 21st century.
Thank you. Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North for leading this important debate. I want to begin by mentioning the League Division 2 club in my constituency, Tranmere Rovers. Tranmere was unfairly relegated during the first lockdown because the season was ended. Behind the English Football League's decision to end the season for League 1 and 2 clubs lay one thing and one thing alone, and that was money. Maintaining the prize of entry into the Premier League for 3 lucky championship clubs meant that Tranmere and others were relegated without the ball being kicked. This is one example of why I firmly believe that the fan-led review of football governance must result in the establishment of an independent regulator for football in this country. It is a burning necessity in the light of the scandal of the recently proposed and thankfully abandoned European Super League. But my fear is that, like the Terminator, the ESL will be back unless action is taken now to reform the governance of the entire sport. Compare and contrast the fabulous wealth of the Premier League and the tragic scuppering of clubs like Bury. Compare and contrast the attempt to set up a selfish and permanent closed circle with the work that Tranmere Rovers do in their local community. During the lockdown, the club invested £60,000 in an abandoned recreation facility in one of my town's mostly private estates, the Beechwood. They have installed a gym and transformed it into a community asset that is giving youngsters an alternative to the lure of county line drug dealers. And Tranmere fans have supplied 50,000 meals to vulnerable people, over 1,000 shopping and medication drop-offs, and hundreds of toys for those who in need at Christmas. This highlights the reality that most football clubs' community assets, they are there for the local people, they are there for the fans, and the best of them work with their fans for the common good of the club and community. I know that there are many honourable members who local clubs do similar activities, but we need to go beyond simply applauding the good work of some and address the key issues that could so easily undermine the game in a way that the threat of the ASL almost did. There are 2 issues I believe an independent regulator can and should tackle. First, we need to reform the distribution of money in the game. The Independent newspaper reported a comment from an official of one of the Premier League's top 6. We don't want too many Leicester Cities. This outrageous comment comes from a representative of a monopoly, not just in this country, but across European football. The financial giant Deloitte estimates that to complete a football top-level clubs require a minimum of £400 million a year. This needs reform because it creates a scramble for money instead of a scramble for sporting glory. Number 1 on the list of the independent regulator must be to devise a genuinely fair and equitable distribution of wealth throughout the football pyramid. Otherwise, there will be a lot more Berries and Boltons. Number 2 on that list must be to tackle the fractured nature of football governance. Now we have the Premier League, the FA and the EFL all pushing different agendas and looking after different aspects of the game without checks or balances. I believe that the regulator we need is the one that represents the whole of the game and ensures that rather than sacrifice the long-term interest of the game to short-term financial gain, the entire football pyramid needs to work as one. That way we can put paid to the ESL Terminator ever coming back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, for the way in which he introduced the debate and for securing this extremely important debate. In the brief time we have, there are 2 key issues in which I want to highlight. The first is to remind colleagues that although it is the English Football League and the English Football League pyramid, that there are 4 Welsh teams that are part of that: Swansea, Cardiff, Wrexham and Newport. Now, as we are always aware of the union of the United Kingdom, then we share our passion in sport and in soccer and in football in the same way. So therefore, Welsh teams are part of the privileges of the English Football League structure, but we're also subject to the same risks that all the other clubs face as well. And we need to remember that fans come from all over the United Kingdom and beyond. And whatever actions come out of this petition and review, then they are relevant factors and relevant people, fans, wherever they are in the UK or around the world. And the second issue I want to highlight, that in spite of the presence of 4 clubs in the English pyramid system, it doesn't detract from the importance of the Welsh pyramid structure, and I want to highlight an experience that is very relevant to the English structure as well. And in that, I want to refer to Barry Town Football Club, which is now known as Barry Town United. I should declare an interest as the honorary president, but I would also say that it was a highly successful club over very many years with a long history, including European success. It has passionate fans just like every other football club, but it also has the most professional coaching structure. And I pay tribute to Gavin Chesterfield and his wife, Hannah Chesterfield, but also the whole structure behind him because of what they have achieved. And I hope you will indulge me for a moment just to highlight that. In 2013, we ended up with a disgruntled owner who had lost interest in the club and initially allowed these supporters to run the club for most of the season. He then decided, for whatever reason, and we can all make judgments on that, to withdraw them from the league with 2 games left in the season, in spite of having an extremely successful season. Now, of course, they wanted to qualify as a Phoenix club, but the regulatory challenges that we had ended up in the High Court, costing tens of thousands of pounds for a local club in order to get reinstated. We eventually won, but that was purely because of the passion of the supporters and of the coaching structure and of the supporters committee that ran it. So in the 15 seconds I have remaining, much of the attention of this debate has understandably focused on the wealth and the exploitation of fans through overcharging, through the merchandising and withdrawing them to a Super League. But there are local clubs where, through disgruntled owners, for whatever reason, the structures and laws as they stand don't lend themselves for the fans to take control unless they are determined as the fans and supporters of Barry Town United. Thank you.
Siobhan McDonough.
Thank you, Chair. I begin by proudly declaring my interest as an AFC Wimbledon season ticket holder, a club with historically symbolic roots in today's debate. We all know that football clubs have meaning far deeper than any result on a Saturday afternoon. For me, it's a cherished childhood memories of Wimbledon match days with my dad, and particularly his joy receiving tickets to the famous 1988 club final against Liverpool to see the Crazy Gang beat the Culture Club. I'll never forget him racing down to the King's Head from post-match reception to show off his autograph book, bursting with his hero signatures. But just 3 years later, his joy turned sour. Our club left its home in Plough Lane in 1991 before being stolen 60 miles up the M1 to Milton Keynes, an event that shook sport and, just like the Super League, exposed the hyper-commercial world of football. And so began one of English football's greatest stories, the birth of fan-owned AFC Wimbledon, according to the FA Commission, a club that was not in the wider interests of football. How wrong they were. A democratic supporters organisation, the Dons Trust, owns AFC, giving fans control of the future of our club. And after 6 promotions in 13 seasons, we soared our way to League One, coming an awful long way from the open trials on Wimbledon Common, where a team was cobbled together to face Sutton United just a few weeks later. The result that day didn't matter. Our dream was now real. For anybody who wants a little light summer reading, they might want to read Eric Samuelson's book, All Together Now, How a Group of Football Fans Right or Wrong and Brought the Club Back Home, our former chief executive. When a club is truly fan-led, the results for the community can be remarkable. Throughout the pandemic, the Dons Local Action Group, a 2,000-strong volunteer group of AFC fans, expertly led by Xavier Wiggins, honoured in the Queen's Birthday list, Cormac van der Hoen and Craig Wellstead, have distributed hundreds of thousands of food boxes, tablets and laptops across South London. A club that gives heart and soul back to the community in which they belong. Dad would have been so proud to see our team back at Plough Lane next season. I hope to Margaret, my sister, and I hope to sponsor a match in his memory in his birthday month of February. And I can assure all members that you'll be able to hear us shout as far away as Milton Keynes, "Come on, you Dons!"
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Miss Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. As ever, it's a pleasure to take part in any debate that my honourable friend for Stoke-on-Trent North is involved in. I'd just like to say that what you've just heard is what football is about. I am absolutely fed up to the back teeth of football only being taught through the prism of 5 or 6 clubs in the Premier League who think they have a God-given right to dominate football and to decide what other clubs in their vicinity, what happens to them, and the lack of care within English football from those major clubs, from the EFL and from the FA regarding Bury is something that I would not have believed until I became an MP and found out the complete negligence with which the history, hope and passion that's just been displayed here for every single person in Bury were let down, and nobody cared, and still nobody cares in respect of that. I support the call for an independent regulatory body, and if I could just use the example of Bury Football Club to support this. Bury, not very important to the football pyramid, 2 times FA Cup winners, Gig Lane built in 1885, one of the oldest football stadiums in the world, and along with Ashington and Greenwich in London, we produce more English footballers than any other town. Stuart Day took over the club in 2013. 4 years later, wages had jumped threefold to 4.5 million. This was the point I was making to my honourable friend. So during that same period, the club's revenues grew by less than 50% to 3.2 million. That meant that Bury was spending 140% of their entire turnover on wages. So the club were persistently late paying other clubs, persistently late making loan payments. The EFL and the football regulatory bodies did nothing. When Mr Day's property business collapsed, the club was effectively insolvent. The EFL knew this, the FA knew this and did nothing. What they did do was allow the club to be taken over by a man called Steve Dale, and I would need hours to talk about Steve Dale, but that he took over the club for £1 with no way of funding this club. In that situation, it was a scandal, and it led to my club, or my town's club, being kicked out of the league. And this is not just something that involves Parliament, it involves the passion, and I have seen personally how people in Bury have been affected by the loss of something that for 70, 80 years people have been going to watch it. It's part of their lives, part of their heritage, part of what makes them proud of the town of Bury. And the big Premier League clubs around us did nothing. There was no Manchester United coming knocking on the door saying, what can we do to help? No Manchester City coming on the door. Nothing. No local authority. The fans of Bury have been left to themselves. And I think that the recent debate regarding the EFL Super League was very nice. It suited certain people on TV to be outraged by that. But those same people never defended Bury, never defended AFC Wimbledon, because they don't care. They don't care, and once we have, hopefully, a regulator who can at least give some responsibility to the Football League pyramid that we have, perhaps that care will be back in the system.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Miss Elliott, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank the member for Stoke-on-Trent North for introducing this really important debate. Many football clubs were created by workers at the heart of their communities. Luton Town, the club I'm so proud to have in my constituency of Luton South, was founded democratically when John Charles Lomax and George Deacon arranged a public meeting at the Town Hall on the 11th of April 1885 to form a town club. Lutonians opposed another group's secretive plans to create a club and instead supported this transparent, democratic creation of the club we are so proud of now. As industry grew in Luton, so did the club, and that cuts to the heart of what football represents for so many. Sports clubs are not a business like any other. They are intrinsically linked to the communities they represent. And having met with Luton Town Supporters Trust and Loyal Luton Supporters Club, what stands out to me most is how much they care about the club as a central feature of our town's identity that should be celebrated. The driving force of football is the comradeship amongst fans and communities. And at the weekend, we saw an overwhelming display of heartfelt solidarity in response to Christian Eriksen's collapse, and I wish him a speedy recovery. The principal and only concern of all fans across the world was Christian's health, and seeing the Danish and Finnish fans being united in showing their support when the match restarted was truly moving. Indeed, football transcends borders and communities, and fans come together through our shared love of the sport. And I've experienced this firsthand with the passionate Scandinavian hatters from Norway and Sweden, who are an excellent part of Luton Town's fan base, and many of them I call friends. Measures must be put in place to protect and extend fans' influence in their clubs. The Labour Party has called for reform of the governance of football for more than a decade. We need the government's review to be truly fan-led to make this a watershed moment that reforms our game's dysfunctional governance. We must put an end to the billionaire owners of the biggest clubs running our sport purely for profit. They very clearly cannot be trusted to regulate themselves. And strict measures must be in place to prevent any further attempts to create a European Super League, as well as clubs like Bury suffering those awful situations too. And as one of the vice chairs of the APPG for football supporters, I support the Football Supporters Association's Sustain the Game campaign that outlines a plan to protect our clubs as community assets, improve transparency to ensure everyone knows who owns their club and how they operate, to impose financial controls with teeth to ensure clubs and leagues are regulated, to strengthen the football pyramid to safeguard its long-term sustainability and ensure supporters' voices are at the heart of their clubs. The fan-led review needs to bring about lasting change through the introduction of legislation to create a thoroughly independent regulator. And as Saving Our Beautiful Game has put it, this is an unprecedented opportunity to reboot the game and side with millions of fans during a summer of football. I hope to read an interim report from the fan-led review in July that lays the ground for systemic change in our game. Thank you.
Jane Hunt. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Elliott. May I first thank the 412 people in my constituency who have signed these petitions. Football is deeply rooted in the fabric of our society, particularly in Loughborough, the national centre of sport. It unites local communities and brings together people from all backgrounds and all walks of life. As one of my constituents said, football is a living, breathing part of British culture, which must be protected from the heights of European football all the way down to the Sunday League. As we know, there's been a huge backlash about plans for a European Soccer League. I very much welcome the government's fan-led review of football governance. Loughborough University has offered to assist in this review, and I would be grateful if their offer and expertise was taken up. I also hope that examples of good ownership shine through in the review and serve as reminders of how football clubs can do right by their fans and support their local communities. For example, Leicester City Football Club not only deliver football and physical activity sessions for local people, but they also support refugees to rebuild their lives in the area and have facilitated donations from fans to refurbish a hospital unit at the Leicester Royal Infirmary. The training club's groundsman has even shared his expertise with the Bowls Club in Sileby in my constituency to help improve their bowling green to Commonwealth Games standard. This is a fantastic example of what club owners' priorities should be and the contribution they can make to the area in which they are based. Ahead of this debate today, I met with the Foxes Trust, which is a non-profit making supporters trust for fans of Leicester City Football Club, to discuss the government's review as well as their thoughts on the petitions. The Trust stressed that its relationship with the owners of Leicester City works very well because they fully understand the community aspects of the club, which is backed up by prudent financial management. However, given recent incidents throughout football, and many that we've heard today, the Trust believes that meaningful dialogue with properly constituted supporter groups needs to be legislated for.
With regards to the 50+1 share model, the Trust feels that this will be difficult to instigate in the UK. Furthermore, while fans should not have the ability to veto all decisions made by the board, the Trust has said that they should absolutely have more say over the club's finances and business plans and be able to veto certain decisions which protect a club's heritage, location and playing facilities. For example, this could be through a golden share, which would be administered via an elected fan to the club's board and an independent executive director with responsibility for club heritage, elected by fans groups via a vote of key stakeholders, such as season ticket holders. With regards to independent regulation of football, a local resident who has contacted me said that an independent regulator is needed to, and I quote, preserve the integrity of the English football pyramid and prevent its destruction by overseas owners and investors who do not understand its importance to the people of this country and wish to impose their own vision purely for profit purposes without understanding its place in the community. I would be grateful if the Minister could take these comments into account as part of the discussions. Thank you.
Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I also congratulate the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North for securing this hugely important debate. Like football fans up and down the country, I strongly opposed the European Super League proposition, not only because it contravened basic sporting principles of integrity and competition, but also because it was driven entirely by the greed of a few wealthy clubs. Ultimately, sport and culture should be for everyone, not just for millionaire owners and investors to make a profit. I congratulate all football fans who make their voices heard and force the Big Six into an embarrassing U-turn. This showed how sport can bring our communities together and was a reminder that the ultra-rich owners of these teams are merely temporary custodians of the teams that were created by working people. Despite the increasing commercialisation of the game, football clubs, nearly all of which were forged from working class communities, continue to provide a strong sense of belonging and civic pride to so many people in Leicester and across the UK. I support all proposals to increase fan ownership of their clubs, including a 50+1 model that is successfully used in Germany to ensure that fans have majority voting rights. This can shift the balance of power away from rampant profit seeking and back towards fan accessibility and affordability, and can help ensure that nothing like the ESL fiasco ever happens again. To that end, I also fully support an independent football regulator to prevent the ultra-rich owners of elite clubs from using our game as their plaything. As a Leicester lass, winning the FA Cup for the first time in our 137-year history was a fantastic achievement that speaks to the excellent work done by everyone associated with Leicester City Football Club. This sustained success provides the perfect antidote to the greed and unfairness that define the recent European Super League proposals. Leicester City provides the best example against this unjust model and is an excellent case study to reform the game in favour of fans and communities. Football, of course, can be an immense force for good, yet the sport has a deeply unhealthy side that is in need of regulation. Appalling racist abuse of footballers online and in stadiums remains endemic. It's shameful, actually, that the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet did not forcefully condemn the booing of England players by a small minority of so-called supporters. The government's tacit endorsement of this hatred gives oxygen to the far right. We must reform football in favour of the fans and the working class communities that created the beautiful game. And whilst we do so, we must eradicate all forms of hatred from the sport. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to begin by congratulating England for their win against Croatia. This group of players showcased the very best of a multicultural, socially conscious country. Sunday's goal was assisted by a player of Jamaican and Irish descent and finished by a striker born in Jamaica and raised in a diverse borough in northwest London. But what's special about this team goes beyond the pitch. From Raheem Sterling, who was this week recognised for his anti-racist work in sport, to Marcus Rashford, who's ensured that millions of working-class kids have been fed during the holidays. And it's not just the players. In response to boos by supposed fans and also Conservative MPs who said that they would boycott the team, the manager has been clear that we have a duty to stand up for our values. So I'd like to commend Gareth Southgate, the players and the vast majority of fans who backed the decision to take the knee. Madam Chair, our clubs aren't just businesses, they're part of our communities and the social fabric that bind us together. But the European Super League debacle showed, once and for all, that clubs shouldn't be the playthings of billionaires. But this wasn't the beginning of the problem. It's been a trajectory football has been going down for a number of years, seen in the ever-widening gap between the clubs at the top and the rest of the pack. In a single season, the Premier League clubs made a combined operating profit of £900 million, compared to the combined losses of more than £400 million for the 72 clubs in the Championship, League One and League Two. Financial sustainability for these clubs is now an ever-present danger. We know this too well in Coventry, where financial challenges stopped the Sky Blues from owning the stadium that they helped to build, repeatedly forcing the team to play home games outside of the city. Next year, I'm pleased to say that they are returning to Coventry, but the underlying problems remain. The European Super League plans might be gone, but billionaire owners will continue to put their greed before our clubs and our communities. Instead of tinkering around the edges, we need to address the problem at its root. That's taking ownership out of the hands of the out-of-touch elites and giving it back to the fans. And that's what the 50% plus one rule would do. Like it does in Germany, where no teams were part of the Super League plans and where tickets are significantly lower. Madam Chair, football was created by the working class, but it has been stolen by the rich. It's time we take it back. Thank you.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I too congratulate the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North on securing this vital debate. It is also an honour to follow my good friend, the Member for Coventry South, and like her, I too am a proud Liverpool fan. And football, and specifically the huge range of issues that the game has faced in recent years, is a topic I know that is particularly close to all of our hearts, and it is a privilege to speak in today's debate. Football is clearly beloved by many, yet far too often it finds itself in a huge mess. Widespread, meaningful reform is urgently needed, and the structures in place at the moment are failing at all levels. Currently, clubs, including my beloved LFC, have a huge amount of power if they are in the Premier League. Yet, shockingly, it is absolutely clear that at this level, no one is truly accountable to the interests of the supporters. And make no mistake, it is the fans, the ones who turn up, rain or shine, win or lose, the ones who pour their hearts and often their earnings into the game, that should be at the very centre of the game's governance. While I was pleased to see that some clubs, including Man United, have finally decided to engage with fans through a fans forum, clearly, given everything we have witnessed over the last few months, these forums should have been in place decades ago. The government's fan-led review of football is thankfully in the safe hands of the Member for Chatham and Aylesford, but we also must remember that sports clubs are not a business, as other members have said. These clubs are at the very heart of our communities. In my area, we have a number of thriving local teams, including Tonrevel AFC, Pontyclean FC, Pontytown FC, Treforest FC, Church Village FC, amongst many, many others. And they have all helped our local area through the pandemic and will be central to the recovery too. Alongside the big Premier League teams, these much-loved clubs at grassroots level also are desperately in need of support. And indeed, we only need to look to the situation that Wigan Athletic found themselves in last year as a stark reminder of how urgently widespread reform is needed. But it really doesn't have to be this way. As a proud Welsh Member of Parliament, it will come as no surprise when I invite colleagues to look across the border at the success that National League side Wrexham have seen in recent years. While the takeover of the club is fairly unique given the new owner's links to Hollywood, it is a model that others across the UK could do well from taking note of. Soon after the deal was announced, the new owners launched their mission statement, which had transparency at its very root. Met with overwhelming support from fans, Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds do not describe themselves as owners, but rather as custodians of the historic football club, of which they have a privilege and an honour of guarding. So, Madam Chair, in short, as I realise time is short, it is absolutely vital that the government uses this opportunity and their fan-led review of football to make lasting, impactful change on a sector that for too long has remained unregulated. And on a personal level, I will always stand ready to work with colleagues across the political divide for the good of the beautiful game. Diolch.
John McDonnell.
Thank you, Chair. You've got a succession of Liverpool supporters, I'm afraid. I'm a member of the Spirit of Shankly Supporters Club. We're currently in discussions with the club about the role that supporters will play. And I can say to the Honourable Member for Mitcham and Morden, I was at Wembley when the crazy gang beat us. I'm still trying to work out how, to be honest. I'm also a season ticket holder of my local club in Hayes, Hayes and Yeading United. We're a club that discovered Les Ferdinand, Cyril Regis, Jason Roberts. It's the sort of club that contributes so much, even though not in the league itself. And I think fans now have made it absolutely clear that they want immediate safeguards for supporters to be able to protect the best interests of their club. And that's why I support the idea of legislation which requires all English clubs to secure a 51% majority of their registered season ticket holders on any major decision that fundamentally affects the club, either its identity or its future. For instance, the competitions it plays in, a change of home ground, change of name, club colours or badge. But I think fans also need longer term control as well. And I think actually we need to adopt the German 50+ rule on supporter ownerships of clubs. And how do we get there? I think it's simple. And where clubs' shares are being sold either by shareholders or through new share issues, the legislation should require vendors to make shares available on a first refusal basis to recognise democratically controlled supporters' trusts. This rule would apply until the trusts own 51% of the club shares. Let me just throw in one other issue while we're talking about football. I'd like a plea to actually include in that legislation the control of what they were described as the supporting crown jewels, so that at least 20 Premier League games per season equally split between the clubs, so that fans can enjoy at least 2 matches per season, are on free-to-view channels. In that way, you get a fairer distribution of access to football on television. I support the overall campaign as well in terms of supporting a new regulator. The regulator could be responsible for the approval of takeovers, application of a strengthened fit and proper person test for owners, oversight of a club licensing scheme to ensure high standards of governance, and management of a system of redistribution of the club's revenues to ensure the health of football at every level of the pyramid. Actually, most of these policies were developed by us and were in the Labour manifesto of 2019, but that would be gloating simply to refer to that. Thank you, Chair.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank all the petitioners who signed both petitions and the 9,000 plus people who responded to the committee's survey. Over 10 million people sat down yesterday to watch England play Croatia. It's our national sport, and football clubs stand as historic institutions within our communities, across the UK, of course. And whilst I acknowledge that a move towards 50+1 ownership of clubs in England cannot be achieved overnight, the forthcoming review must be used as an opportunity to rebalance the current ownership structure in the favour of match-going supporters. In April, I coordinated a crossbench letter of over 60 MPs and peers calling for a very simple change in the law to force Premier League and EFL clubs to give their long-standing season ticket holders a 51% voting majority on any decision affecting the club's identity or future. The ESL debacle highlighted why it is essential that supporters are given the majority vote in their clubs. It underlined a growing sense that our clubs are all too often run in the interests of remote and unaccountable owners. The Glazer family takeover of Manchester United since 2005 is a prime example. Before the Glazers took over, Manchester United had no debts. Today, the club's net debt stands at around £455.5 million, yet the Glazer family continue to pocket huge dividends. The forthcoming review must recommend additional criteria to prevent rogue owners buying clubs solely for their own gain. I represent thousands of Newcastle United fans in the Jarrow constituency who have seen a stagnation of their club under Mike Ashley. Ashley applies the same business model to his Sports Direct empire as he does his football club.
one of minimalism, low spending, and one of little or no regard to decent, hard-working people. And it would be remiss of me, of course, Madam Chair, not to mention that I also have a few thousand Sunderland fans in my constituency too. Whilst there is no doubt that the football pyramid needs reform and improvement, it ensures that a proportion of money from clubs in the Premier League trickles down to lower teams and grassroots football, in turn securing the future of the game. It goes without saying how much grassroots clubs matter to our communities. Earlier this year, Hebburn Town won the FA Vase. It got the town noticed and had a massive impact on Heburn's civic pride. But a huge number of our grassroots teams are on the brink. If they go, it will hit not just the football pyramid, but tear the heart out of many already struggling post-industrial communities. This is why it's essential that the forthcoming review recommends an independent financial regulator to represent the interests of supporters, protect against bad practices, and generally seek to prioritise the wider good of the game rather than allow the clubs to act solely in their self-interest. And finally, football must act as an equaliser. Clubs must do all they can to ensure social justice within their own community and the wider football community. We cannot allow further disconnection between fans and their teams, whilst a wealthy few line their own pockets, because ultimately football is nothing without its fans. Thank you.
Alison McGovern. Thank you, Ms Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, particularly given your own expertise in this subject. I'd like to begin by thanking the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, who ably led the debate, and congratulate him on having this debate today. We've had many of these debates in the time that I've been a Member of Parliament, and the subscription to the debate yet again shows what an important issue this is to us all. I would particularly like to congratulate the member for Mitcham and Morden on her excellent contribution. Her dad would be so proud, even if she did remind me of the 1988 FA Cup final, which sends a shiver down my spine even to this day. I'd also like to point out, I don't know what's going on in Kent, but we had a brilliant contribution from the member for Maidstone and the Weald and from the member from Folkestone on Hyde, and everybody is wishing the member for Chatham and Aylesford the very best in her endeavours on this subject. So thank you, Kent, for sending us MPs who are doing such great work on football reform. I think it's fair to say that many of the points that they make are supported right across the House, not just by members who've spoken today, but by many members right across the chamber of all parties. We want to see change happen. And I just want to make three very brief points on what I think that change should look like. As the member for Hayes and Harlington pointed out, my party, the Labour Party, has had previous manifestos in 2019, in 2017, in 2015 and in 2010 that call for reform on football governance. So this will come as a surprise to nobody. Indeed, I apologise to the Minister because he will have heard me say much of this before. But my hope is that the repetition affirms our cross-party position that we do want to see that change and we are going to make it happen. And if there's anybody in the world of football that is in doubt about that, then they should read the contributions to this debate, because we have made our intentions firm. Firstly, on football finances, I do support the member for Maidstone and the Weals bill that she brought before our House, and all of the contributions that she has made with her very expert group that many members have mentioned, that we need an independent regulator. But if we're to have an independent regulator, many people will rightly ask the question, to what end? The answer has to be finances, because as the ESL debacle made abundantly clear, if you believe in competition, you cannot let the finances of football undermine that principle of competition. We need competition not in name only, but in reality, in actuality. And at the moment, what we call the football pyramid has very significant financial cliff edges within it to get into the Championship and to get out of League Two. Those are significant problems in our football pyramid, and we need an independent regulator that can change the way that football finances work so that we have a real pyramid and real competition again. If anybody thinks that this is too hard, as the member for Stoke-on-Trent North pointed out, we did this in banking. People said that was too complicated, too difficult. We're good at creating regulators in this country, and what we need is to do that in relation to football so that there's an independent voice to speak up for the fans, not least to protect the existence of clubs. And we've heard from the member for Bury about just how horrendous it is when the existence of your club is threatened. And you must have that protection, that your club can't be ripped away from you because of someone else's poor financial mismanagement. And it's not just league clubs that need genuine redistribution, it's the grassroots as well. Second point, fans. I think we as football supporters need to ask ourselves, what do we want our role to be in this? And that's why I'm pleased that the review is fan-led, and I know that the member for Chatham and Aylesford is talking to lots of fans. Do we want this veto that many have talked about? And if so, how do we get it? And I'd like to ask the Minister what legislation is being prepared to look at that. What constraints do we want on the behaviours of owners? We know the owners and directors test is good for nothing, really. So what kind of test do we really want? Not just a snapshot, but an ongoing check on behaviours. And we do want that support for developing different ownership models, as many have talked about. So could the Minister say what preparation the department is doing to support, as was done through Supporters Direct in the past, different ownership models being directed? Third and final point from me, Miss Elliott, inclusion. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. We are not in a good moment when it comes to the fight against racism in the beautiful game. We have to be really frank and honest about this. Proper football fans don't boo their team. It's one of the things that I remember most about first going to Anfield, Miss Elliott. I remember being told, we never boo our players. If they're wearing our shirt, those are our people, and we do not boo them. And that, for me, is the end of it. So I suggest we all get behind our team, not least because we've got some very significant challenges that we need to fight together, whether it's racism or misogyny. Because the fact is that of sport in the UK, 96% approximately of broadcast time is men playing football, which leads to a 99% pay gap between women and men. And, you know, we now have the example of Lauren James and Rhys James, who are both equal in talent, but because of their gender, face widely disparate prospects in terms of income from football. So I'd like to ask the Minister how we can make progress on that, as well as something I know will be supported by all sides in this House, disability football. Very important as well. We need to get it on the agenda. So that said, we have a lot to do. I hope that we will do it together and make progress quickly, because we've had many debates of this form. Now is the time for action.
Minister Huddleston.
Well, thank you, Miss Elliott. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. You must have been biting at the bit not to be contributing yourselves directly in today's debate, because I know how knowledgeable and passionate you are about this topic. I'm very grateful to the member for Stoke-on-Trent North from the Petitions Committee for bringing forward this debate on the reform of the structure of football in this country, and also for all colleagues from across the House and from various nations as well, who've made very constructive contributions today. And again, the knowledge, the insight, the passion, and the experience and the expertise has been incredible. And I'm sure many stakeholders in football have been listening to today's debate. I'd also like to thank Aston Villa fan Angus Yule, who raised the petition on the 50+1 rule, and the Blackpool FC Supporters Trust, who raised the petition in respect of an independent regulator for football, as well as the tens of thousands of people who took the time to sign them. We're having this debate today because of football fans who want to see changes to the structure of football in this country. I thank them for their passion and their commitment to improving our national game. And both petitions received well over 100,000 signatures, which clearly signals the level of interest in this subject. I also note the responses from fans to the Petitions Committee survey, which the Honourable Member for Jarrow mentioned, which asked the original petitions for their views on the most important issues facing football governments in England today. They highlight areas of concern, including the need to protect the football pyramid, concerns over how revenue is distributed, club ownership and the ability of fans to influence decisions. And the government's independent fan-led review will be looking at these issues closely, as well as fans' views and suggestions on how we can change the structure of our game for the better. Now, fans have a crucial part to play in the reform of our national game. They bear the brunt and fallout of bad ownership decisions. They see where the structures are not working for the good of the game. They can articulate most clearly how important local clubs and grounds are to the local community, and how club badges and names give a sense of heritage, belonging and place. And our independent review has already started its work at pace and is hearing from fans, football authorities and experts from the worlds of finance, governance and regulation to build the framework for the future of football in England. The review's chair, the member for Chatham and Aylesford, who quite clearly does command the respect of many who've spoken today, has already met many of the fan groups. I have regular meetings with the chair, but I'm also meeting with fan groups myself, most recently in Manchester, and I look forward to meeting more fans over the coming weeks and months. And in addition to the chair's meeting with fan groups, the review team will also be shortly launching a survey to allow all fans to contribute their views, and I'll ensure that members are notified when this survey is launched. And I think that's quite important because we have a lot of football fans in the country, some of them not necessarily specifically fans to an individual club, and it's important that their views are heard as well.
Would the honourable member give way?
So.
Alan Cairns.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving the extra minutes for giving way and pay tribute for his work and the way in which he's following it. In his engagement with fans, will he consider going outside of England because of the points that we made, that fans are across the United Kingdom for clubs that may be predominantly in England?
Yeah, I thank the right honourable member for that contribution. I'm confident we will be able to do that, I think both in electronic form if we've got some surveying, but then in also mechanisms for the very reasons he expressed. I had the pleasure of visiting Wrexham myself last year, and indeed they've got interesting new owners, as you said, which actually shows the commitment and the ability to invest and invest appropriately with the right attitude from international owners. I do think that's important because we shouldn't be tainting all potential investors, including overseas investors, with the same brush. Yeah. Now, Madam Chairman, I turn now to the first petition, which calls for the enforcement of the 50+1 rule for professional football club ownership, in reaction to the thankfully unsuccessful move to create the European Super League, and the opposition of the House showed that indeed football can unite us, including in opposition to certain things as well as things that we actually want to see. On that point, could I also join the honourable member for Luton South's comments earlier on when she mentioned the incident this weekend, which we were all very alarmed to see, and wish Christian Eriksen a speedy and full recovery. Now, as members will be aware, the 50+1 rule has been used in German football, during which time English football has pursued a very different model. There are clearly pros and cons of both approaches, and the terms of reference of our fan-led review does include considering models from other countries, so we are looking at this model. Members will be aware, though, that the complexities of retrofitting the German model into an English system and of the benefits that some, though by no means all, wealthy individual owners have brought to our clubs. Now, the review will be considering whether any aspects of these alternative ownership models could be beneficially translated into the English League system. At this stage, it's for the chair and panel to consider all the options available. I wouldn't want to prejudge their recommendations, but work is underway with the review's interim report due next month. Now, the review is also looking at other options that fans are keen to explore, such as the issue of voting rights, with fans having a greater say in how their clubs are run, and whether this would mean direct engagement and involvement with the club's board and executives, and the issue of fans having some form of voting rights or a golden share on key issues affecting the club will also be considered by the review, and I know that the FSA, the Football Supporters Association, is supporting this option, and it was supported by honourable members today, including the honourable member for Loughborough and others who mentioned this. Now, what the panel and the government, and most importantly fans, will be seeking from the final recommendations is to ensure a stable and sustainable framework for our national game for the future and beyond. And key to this sustainability is responsible club ownership, integrity in club governance, a recognition of the proud footballing history and heritage of our national game, mentioned by many honourable members today, a recognition and understanding of the value that football clubs bring to their local communities, and most importantly, a recognition of the value and expertise that fans can contribute to their clubs. We do not want to again see the destruction of clubs like Bury. We do not want to again see clubs seeking to break the framework of English football simply to become more wealthy at the expense of other clubs. And we do not want to see our cherished and historic football grounds taken away from their communities. We do want to see stable and responsible ownership of our football clubs. We do want to see fans involved in the crucial decision affecting their clubs. And we do want to maintain the thrill, the excitement, the uncertainty and the competitiveness that gives English leagues their status and which makes them the envy of the world. Now, Madam Chairman, I turn now to the second E-petition, which calls for the introduction of an independent regulator for football in England by December this year. I think the strength of feeling on this issue from honourable members today was fairly clear. Again, I can't preempt or prejudge the recommendations of the Chair or indeed the government's response, but I say there is a very clear message here, and this is again and again in multiple debates that we've had the honourable member, my opposite number, there is a very clear message here. Now, and I fully understand also the weight of feeling behind the huge support given that over 140,500 signatures for this petition, which clearly demonstrates the appetite for better regulation of the structures in football from fans. Certainly. Yeah.
And thank you, Ms Elliott, and I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way. I just wanted to ask, has he seen the open letter on this issue of regulation, whose lead signatories are Gary Lineker, Rio Ferdinand and Jamie Carragher, who will all be aware of their work and contribution in this area, that they are suggesting regulation should not be diluted by Premier League representatives or anyone else employed by, taking fees from or on the board of professional football clubs or football authorities. Can I ask him to confirm that he's seen that letter, that it's being taken account of, and that this is something that will be covered by the review?
Yeah, I thank the honourable lady for that. Yes, I have seen that letter, and I have to say I've seen many submissions. There's a lot of really genuinely good ideas that are being suggested in terms of the review. Many honourable members who have spoken earlier on in this debate as well have great expertise. Certainly the Select Committee has done a huge amount of work in this area over many years as well, and we heard from some of those who've been involved in various proposals over the years. It's really important that we respect and accept the views of people who've been absolutely pivotal to football, who've led football, who've played football over the years. But the most important thing, and the voice we really want to hear in this review, is the fans. Now, I think it's fair and reasonable to say that those people who have been leading football and have great expertise and senior leadership positions and so on are also clearly fans and genuinely speak for fans as well. But I think the most important thing is we listen to fans. But we will be taking on board many contributions from very many formats which have come in over the years. And the fan-led review is genuinely open to all possibilities when it comes to changing the structure of football governance, and we should not prejudge the outcome of the review here today. Football governance has had some very public failures, many of which have been referenced today, and it's the fans who have borne the brunt of these failures again and again. Fans cannot simply move on to a new club. That is what makes football and sport different to standard businesses. And the review is working quickly and will deliver an interim report in July. And from that interim report, we'll then have a clear review of how any new structure would work and the preferred options for creating a new, more responsible governance model for football before the final report in October. And as the honourable member opposite rightly mentioned, as did nearly everybody in the debate today, it's not just a matter of having a regulator if we should go down that route, but what the role and responsibilities of the remit of that regulator would be, and we need to think very carefully about that. Madam Chairman, the Government has been clear that we will move quickly to assess the review's recommendations and implement any that we agree are in the interests of fans and the game. And this includes any recommendations that may require legislation for which parliamentary time would be found. And again, I think the tone of the debate today has suggested that we can probably expect cross-party agreement on implementing recommendations if they do require legislation. Football fans in this country have never been simply a backdrop to the game. They are the energy and the commitment that keeps clubs alive. They keep the historic traditions of football alive and create the new traditions. Fans support their clubs, their communities and each other. Our national game cannot survive without their involvement, and I thank all the fans who have made their views known in these two petitions that we have debated today. This is only the start of fan involvement in shaping the next steps in the future of English football. And I'm confident that together we can look to a brighter future for our national game where all voices are heard.
Jonathan Gullis to wind up.
Thank you very much, Miss Elliott. I think today has shown the very best of this place, and actually, whilst it might not be sexy enough to get a 30-second tweet, it is actually the graft that goes on this place every single day, working in consensus to find a way forward. And I would absolutely want to mention the honourable member for Mitcham and Morden, as well as the my honourable friend from Bury North. I think two extremely powerful speeches from personal experience. And if anyone is in ever doubt about why the beautiful game is so important to fans, I urge anyone to watch those two speeches or read those contributions to understand. And I love the fact the honourable member for Mitcham Morden is wearing that shirt with pride. And I hope that image will go out across the world, because ultimately today a statement has been made from this House that change is coming. And I say this, Miss Elliott, in all good nature, if you've got the honourable member or the right honourable member for Hayes and Harlington and I agreeing that governance change is needed, then I tell you what, that's the moment the penny should drop for the FA and others across the world, because whilst we might not necessarily agree fully on how it should be changed, if you can get two such members in this place agreeing, then that says a very powerful statement. I also thought the speech from the right honourable member for the Vale of Glamorgan, who is right, as well as the honourable member for Pontypridd, to point out that Wales does play an important part in the English game as well. And actually hearing the story of the people of Barry and their fight, I think, is really, really important. There was just so many speeches, and sadly time doesn't allow me to go into and rattle into how brilliant all those speeches were. But we've got it, and actually the honourable member, for Birkenhead as well, talking about Tranmere Rovers and their £60,000 investment into helping the community both in terms of fitness but also in tackling county lines, which is a scourge sadly upon the city of Stoke-on-Trent and then the towns of Kidsgrove and Tork, and I know there will be a similar issue in many of our areas. And I think that ultimately a message has been sent, change is needed. I certainly am someone who personally favours the idea of football governance. How, as the Minister said, that is done, the remit of powers that they have, how they are implemented, is something that needs to be very carefully thought through, because it's easy to rush into these things in order to look popular, but ultimately to make sure that this is something that's going to last, and I hope one day can then be actually transferred to the FA, who ultimately should have those responsibilities. And once we have public trust in the Football Association of England, then perhaps we will be able to see them take on those responsibilities. All I can say, Miss Elliott, is I think we can all agree one thing, except maybe those members who aren't English members of Parliament. Football is coming home this summer. And all I would like to say, as always, when I finish these speeches, is up the Vale.
The question is that this House has considered E-petitions 583310 and 584632 relating to football governance. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.